Matcha, capital world of House Finnegan, Grand Palace. From the moment the planet named Matcha was visible to the naked eye, Wyatt felt astonished by it. In his mind, Volantis was more beautiful, but that was the biased opinion of his homeworld, no matter how ultimately insignificant it was. Matcha, on the other hand, was unlike any planet he'd seen before. There were at least a couple dozen different orbital stations around the planet, the smallest of which dwarfed Volantis's space station. Then there were the Lagrange shipyards and anchorages, where ships were produced and stationed for a myriad of reasons. But out of every technological wonder that was not the Noir Navio, seeing the orbital ring around the blue, gray, and yellow planet illuminated by the orange light of its local star was an awe-striking experience. The planet didn't have oceans. Rather, there were several large seas scattered across its surface, with plentiful mountain ranges and a wide collection of climates with crossing rivers and smaller lakes, giving the surface an exotic allure. There were everywhere near the seas, and sitting near the bases of mountain ranges, as in space a constant flow of civilian-grade ships docked and undocked from the stations, whilst shuttles did the same, towing all manner of goods. As Wyatt sat on the balcony staring up at the sky, faintly able to see the orbital ring, he felt his heart racing as the time ticked by, but his smile remained strong and vibrant. He had been able to see his family again and send them as much money as Clara had advised him to. That made him chuckle in both embarrassment and good humor. It wasn't the first time I'd fainted in front of them, but it was still rather embarrassing that they got to see me like that, Wyatt thought as he turned his gaze away from the sky and onto the scenery in front of him. The trees were lush but small. The grass, flowers, and plants that made up the immense garden of the palace were beautiful to behold, even if the grass was more orange rather than the green he was used to. Away from any major population center, the Grand Palace of House Finnegan was a veritable fortress of carved stone, metal, woods, and luxury so outrageous that he couldn't begin to fathom how much the price of the chair he was sitting on was. At the thought of his family and financial inquiries, he turned his gaze to Clara as she continued to do something in front of a mirror while Cynthia stood behind her princess. Her red armor was polished to perfection, her long blue hair lush and sparkling, while her hands ran down Clara's blonde hair as she used a brush on it. Whatever Clara was doing seemed to be important as she stared at her reflection, smiled for a few seconds, then sighed, and used her hands to massage her cheeks, cheekbones, lips, and nose for a few seconds before trying again. "Nervous?" Clara suddenly asked without looking away from the mirror. "How does she do that? Does she have the visual field of a Yikanti?" Wyatt thought before straightening his posture. Clearing his throat, he answered, "Very." "Understandable," Clara replied without her usual playful tone. She paused for a moment, smiling at the mirror for several seconds before sighing in frustration once more. "You had very little time to practice, but Cynthia assures me you won't bring me any shame." A chill ran down his spine for a second before replying, "I can only promise to do my best, Clara." "I ask for no more than that," Clara answered. "Was your video call with your family enjoyable?" Wyatt's smile returned as he nodded once. "Yes, it was enjoyable, albeit short. I was lucky enough to see them all already gathered together." "Thank you, Clara, for allowing me to see them again," he said with deep respect for the princess. "I know you must be disappointed that your reunion was short-lived, Wyatt. However, it had to be done," Clara replied. Wyatt shook his head. "Not at all. Seeing them was more than enough. I even got to see Weskel, though that was because the news about the coup reached them. I followed your advice and orders, Clara. You know more than I do. Who am I to question you? On this particular field, I won't contest your words of praise and self-flagellation, Wyatt," came the princess's reply. "Economics and the proper handling of credits is something that, sadly, almost no commoner is ever instructed on. And nobles? Most members of the nobility don't care for it as long as they have credits to use and waste on frivolous and facetious things." She paused for another moment, smiling at her reflection, and this time obtaining a more favorable result, but not the one she desired yet. "Such a shame, really. All military branches are filled with low-standing, exiled, or fallen nobles because of it, not to mention fourth, fifth, or sixth offspring and branching houses. Competition is fierce because of that, but not the desired type of competition." "What is she talking about?" Blue bloods are always trying to outdo each other because of their damnable honor, pride, ego, and dignity. Or maybe there's more to it than that, Wyatt thought with mild concern due to Clara's tone. It was cold, but conveyed a certain level of sad disdain. I'll ask Gregor, Raquel, and Nultar during our next training session. And you, Wyatt, Clara continued after a brief pause, are what can be described as fresh nobility. More so than anyone else, you must learn to handle your newfound wealth intelligently. Your desire to send your money to your family was a heartfelt but foolish decision. Do you remember what I said? Wyatt nodded. Any transfer above 500,000 credits is tracked by the royal banks instantly. To side with caution, 400,000 credits is a more than generous amount, especially for a commoner family, but it is not a sum that will gain the attention of the royal banks. Despite our current tumultuous times, Duchess Sylvia Emerald would never allow Duke Draymore to directly interfere with the communication buoys and the trading, merchant, and financial systems across the Principality. Else we would devolve into a state of pure chaos, with private assets bidding for power and a crippled economy to contend with as it happened during the previous civil wars that ravaged the Principality, Clara explained dispassionately. I am not even going to pretend I understood any of that, but I've read what happened during the past civil wars. Bloodshed, wholesale murders, the collapse of trade lanes, mass conscription, famine, diseases, entire stations and even planets succumbing to all sorts of reasons, rampant piracy, 100-fold increase in Drazen raids, and even assaults from the Arabians and the hierarchy. The fact the Principality survived at all was an achievement in on itself, Wyatt thought and suppressed a shudder. He definitely didn't want to see that become reality. Nevertheless, Wyatt nodded to let the blonde woman know he in some part shared her fears. A short call was also prudent, Cynthia spoke next. Duke Draymore's agents could be everywhere, and with House Ishtal on his side, he has at his disposal some of the best intelligence officers, spies, and communication agents the Principality has to offer. Our own agents are working tirelessly to counter the Draymore traitors infesting the Principality's networks. Regardless, we must tread carefully and not assume that we are not in harm's way. Now he truly understood the need for secrecy and the restrictions Clara imposed upon his wish to contact his family. 6 million credits would more than ensure the prosperity of his family for a couple of decades at the very least. If he were a man without morals or unquenchable greed, those credits could ensure him a lifetime of not luxury, but stability without having to work another day in his life. He never craved for much, never wanted anything above his position in life, and that hadn't changed. So what was he to do with his remaining wealth? At Clara's behest, he retained 1 million credits within his immediate account for any purchases he might desire. The rest, excluding the 4,000 credits used, had been taken by Clara in good faith and put in various places the moment they reached Matcha and they connected to the Principality's network. Her only explanation was that his money could grow in the proper places by making the right investments. The princess, bless her heart, had tried to explain to him how that worked, why it was important, and the value of the market. But I learned little to nothing. All I really learned is that those things are complicated and, somehow, important. Like that thing she said, compound interest, was it? How can credits make more credits if you don't work for them? Credits are only good to buy the things you need to survive and to save up for when you need medicine. Putting them in other places just waiting sounds so counterproductive. But she's the expert noble, and I'm still just a commoner with a noble title. All I can do is trust her. I don't see why I shouldn't, Wyatt thought to himself. Worry not, Wyatt. Every network is in a state of chaos. Your call and transaction have gone undetected. Without a proper registry of house staples, such movements are seen as done by a mere commoner. There's no reason for any Draymore traitor to search through such channels despite the signal originating from here, Cynthia explained, reassuring the black-haired man and gifting him a pleasant, friendly smile. Ah, there it is, Clara exclaimed before Wyatt could say anything. At long last, she let go of her face. Just in time, too. My brother dearest has contacted me. The procession shall begin in half an hour. Is my hair done, Cynthia? I will need 5 minutes, my princess, Cynthia replied, never stopping her work. You shall be the envy of every lady present, my princess. Flattery is not your strong point, Cynthia. Nevertheless, your pointed comment is much appreciated. More importantly, Wyatt, Clara said firmly. Yes, my princess, he replied, ready to drop to a knee at a moment's notice. After the procession is done and the party begins, remain at my side at all times. I forbid you from mingling, as it were, Clara ordered. Wyatt stared at her, watching her face and the reflection in the mirror. For a second, he could have sworn her eyes lost the spark he'd come to grow accustomed to, replaced by a cold indifference that was deeper and much more terrible than what she showed when dealing with Uriel Hoax. Wouldn't dream of it, Clara, he replied in a more casual tone, forcing his body to relax even as his immediate instinct was to appear as submissive as possible before her. Clara blinked, and the coldness in her eyes vanished, replaced by a more neutral and serious demeanor. I do this for your own protection, Wyatt. You do not know proper protocol. Your house is unknown and new, unestablished yet, but as Knight Banneret of House Astor, your value is immense. Many less than reputable people would do anything to gain your nascent power and influence. Wyatt frowned, now that he understood perfectly. And use me as a pawn in their games for power, influence, and whatnot, right? I am relieved that you understand their end goal, Wyatt. Your instincts are sharp, but there are those who will lie to your face, cover their words with the sweetest honey, and promise you unbelievable rewards. Masters of puppeteering and deception. Lending them an ear is to invite disaster for yourself. She paused and glanced at him. I will not allow you to suffer such a fate, Wyatt. Not to mention that's only half of what you have to worry, Wyatt. Cynthia continued, her voice serious and direct, like when they first shared a conversation. The most formidable and dangerous foes shall be the ladies present. What? Wyatt asked himself, as his brain did a double-take on what he'd just heard. How can they be more dangerous? He blurted out. And adequately handsome and unmarried, the princess said, putting extra emphasis on that particular word. Knight Banneret has appeared right before their eyes. What to do? Sit back and let others make the first approach? The shame, the disgrace. No, you will be sought after, my dear Wyatt. Unmarried ladies, and perhaps those already betrothed but seeking a better prospect, shall take their chance to gain your eye, attention, and, most certainly, your carnal candor for no other reason than to place themselves as high as possible within society, Clara explained. It wouldn't matter if you were appealing to the eye or not in any case, Wyatt. They will come, and they will attempt to use their feminine guile to get what they desire. My princess, these ladies will fight among themselves for the chance to be the one who snares our star pilot and newest Knight Banneret of your house, Cynthia added. It is fortunate that Wyatt Staples is not a man who seeks the warmth of a lady to comfort his bodily desires. I'm not sure if she's serious or if she's mocking me, Wyatt thought, disturbed and taken aback by the turn in the conversation. I suppose that love is not what they desire? He asked with sarcasm. Privileged are those few that manage to allow love, trust, and other such sentiments to build a relationship without sacrificing their standing within their houses. In the games of political power, influences, and personal standing, such silly things as love are anathema. They will lie, they will cheat, and they will use their beauty, their sweet-sounding words, and their bodies to gain what they desire. Do not let them win, Wyatt, no matter how succulent their fruits may be, declared the princess. I understand, Wyatt replied as a shudder coursed through his body. He wasn't ignorant of loveless marriages or arranged ones. Not everyone could be as lucky as his parents, even among commoners, after all. But the prospect of being the center of attention of so many proverbial noble ladies felt disgusting now that he had been warned of their more than likely intentions. The following minutes went on in silence until Cynthia finished brushing Clara's hair. If they were to ask him how it looked, he wouldn't be able to tell the difference, but whatever Cynthia had done seemed to please Clara. That was all he cared about, and the only thing that mattered. As they left the room, the waiting Royal Marines formed around the princess, and they began to walk. Wyatt couldn't help but examine in detail the impossibly exquisite dress Clara was wearing. It was of a soft aquamarine hue, with gold and purple trims and adornments etched into the fabric of the dress in patterns that were breathtaking in detail, and beauty depicting people dancing, birds flying, and precious orange, red, and yellow gemstones adorning her dress. A necklace of platinum graced her neck, crowned with a multicolored gemstone he had never seen before with the crest of House Astor on it. A beautiful black raven with its wings spread wide and holding two swords by its talons. Her arms were covered by long sleeves the same color as her dress. They stopped a few inches from her shoulders and the puffs adorning them. He had never paid attention to her before, but with the elegant and tight-fitting dress she was wearing, he noticed that Clara's breasts were quite large. Averting his gaze from her chest, he focused on the smooth, long dress that at first glance seemed restricting on her legs, but the fabric moved in accordance to her own, molding itself against her flesh to never hamper her movements, even as some of it dragged behind her across the floor. Her feet were covered by some sort of heeled shoe he'd only seen on some ladies back in Volantis. The clink-clank noise it made against the ground was both soft and demanded attention. And all of that splendor was nothing compared to her face. Her expression was beaming with a gentle, soft, warm, caring smile that would knock the air out of anyone laying their eyes upon her for the first time. Her eyes shone with an intensity that denoted she was not only royalty, but a proud member of the royal house Astor. She was the definition of breathtaking. But all Wyatt felt when he laid his eyes upon her was sadness. Now he knew what his princess had been doing in front of the mirror. Her mask was immaculate. Perfect. Had he not seen her put it on, he would have been completely fooled by it. Next to her, Cynthia walked proudly. Her lush, pristine blue hair swayed with every step she took. The only part of her usual armor that was missing was her sword, leaving her unarmed but not unprotected. When he met her, what he believed to be the crest of House Winfield was, in reality, the simplified version of their heraldic shield. But she still displayed it proudly. A blue feather held up between the index finger and the thumb of a hand. Equally beautiful in her own way, Cynthia's expression was solid, stern, and unflinching. Poor be the fool that ushered her wrath. Lastly, himself. He was wearing his armor with the addition of a right purple-colored shoulder cape with gold trims and a single red pin keeping it locked to his armor. His armor was also polished to perfection, and the stag representing his heraldic shield was displayed on his chest. He could remove it later, but for now it was necessary. Tracing his gloved fingers across his chest, his nervousness returned, but nothing he couldn't control. They walked through empty hallways with nothing but the sound of footsteps and Clara's heels for company until two Royal Marines opened a set of doors revealing the Prince, Commander Redford, Commander Juliana, and the other commanders, plus several aides and other nobles. The men wore stylish uniforms or expensive-looking formal clothes with more garments and other accessories on them than actual clothes. The women were similar, though most of those present chose to wear a formal dress. Juliana, of course, wore her uniform. When the prince saw his sister, he stopped the conversation he was having with Marchioness Amelia Finnegan. She was a tall, mature woman with sand-colored skin and several freckles adorning her cheeks. Her eyes were golden, and her hair, black as the night, was long and pristine like obsidian. Other members of her house also surrounded the prince as he broke off to greet his sister. The siblings shared a short-lived but cordial hug. They spoke in whispers that he couldn't hear, and his attention turned to Redford and Juliana, who nodded at him approvingly. The veteran wore his uniform proudly. His chest was covered by medals and other marks of recognition and accolades, similarly to the rest of the high-standing nobles who chose to wear their uniforms instead of formal attire. You can cut the tension in the air with a knife, Wyatt thought as he lazily examined the room, until he recognized Salazar Reed alongside other nobles, the brown-haired man glaring at him silently with his gray, cybernetic eyes. In the absence of his uncle, Admiral Vashakati Reed, he'd be honored to carry his house's banner instead. Damn blue blood. Your brother died because he was a stupid, glory-seeking fool. I never wished for his death, Wyatt thought, matching his glare for a moment before looking away. The wait felt eternal as nobles conversed between themselves. The prince broke his conversation with Clara a minute or so after her entry, returning to the Marchioness's side without any fanfare. A few nobles, such as George Lintar, shot nasty glances at him. Others like William Hemtroke and Lukacs Ishtal ignored him for the most part, but the disdain in their eyes was absent, so that was good at least. Most nobles only spared him a curious glance before returning to their private talks. Finally, the waiting ended when the Marchioness excused herself and stepped out of the room, wearing her expensive yellow and cream-colored dress, while her entourage followed her closely out of the room. The talks died instantly. Everyone straightened themselves and gave themselves a last-moment check to ensure everything was in order. The prince, impassive and elegant as always, only wore a longer cape and jade-colored circlet on his head that made his already imposing figure stand out more and project his potent aura to a far greater extent. He shared a glance with Cynthia, then with Clara, and finally with him, before slowly making his way out of the doors at the other end of the room. Loud trumpets rang, followed by the elegant, sharp voice of the Marchioness, announcing the entrance and arrival of the prince himself. More music and trumpets cried out, welcoming His Majesty. Behind him, several standards rose up, walking behind the prince in two files, leaving His Majesty at the center of the formation. Each banner represented a house powerful enough to be recognized by the prince as loyal to his claim and cause. Among them stood one of Redford's aides, Juliana, and the other commanders, except Lukacs, who remained behind with the other aides. While the prince walked at an evenly pace, almost lethargic, the bearers marched in unison and with near-perfect synchronization, quickly outpacing the prince until they came to an abrupt halt at the end of a short staircase leading up to 3 thrones. One was occupied by Marchioness Amelia Finnegan. The other 2, particularly the one at the center and largest of the 3, remained empty, but not for long. The banner holders turned inward, hit the ground with the blunt bottom of the pole they were holding, and then inclined them ever so slightly, so that their banners hung freely as the prince walked beneath them. The prince never broke his pace, as countless onlookers and several camera drones recorded it from every possible viable angle. As the prince walked up the stairs, flower petals and exquisite feathers fell from the ceiling, and when he sat down on the center throne, a large banner with the crest of House Astor unfurled behind him. Amazing. Pointless, yet amazing, I have to admit. So this is a royal procession? Wyatt thought. A hand landed on his shoulder and his attention turned to face a royal marine. If he was correct, then it was none other than Captain Milcades. Before he could ask anything, Milcades offered him the pole he had been practicing with for the last 4 days, almost without respite. He gripped it and looked up to see his banner, his heraldic shield engraved on it. The surrealness of the situation struck him in full, and he felt dizzy. Shaking his head, he gripped his pole tightly and took a deep breath, putting on his best stoic, emotionless expression. He was nervous, that much was obvious, but there was nothing he could do now about it except clench his teeth and do his best. For them. Do it for them. For Clara. For Cynthia. I won't bring them any shame. I won't let my friends down, he thought, and something within broke. He could feel it. He felt it the moment it happened. They're my friends. Huh. Wyatt Staples? You're officially insane if you think a princess and a lady of House Winfield are your friends, but that's what I feel now. Maybe they won't die. Maybe having friends won't be a waste of time anymore. Maybe, he thought deeply before the trumpets rang and Clara commenced her walk. As soon as he watched Clara advance, his heart raced against his chest, beating so loudly he was sure everyone around him could hear it. The sensation was similar to piloting a fighter, and he embraced it with wholeheartedly. In front of him stood Cynthia, and to his left, Captain Milcades and Commander Redford stood proudly, ready to perform their duty without fail. They advanced as one, the drilling of Cynthia paying off as he maintained a steady, measured march with the other 3 banner holders. It didn't take long for them to march past Clara, who was walking with such grace and perfect balance that she seemed to slide across the red and silver carpet. The buzzing of the drones mixed with the music, trumpets, and applauses from the onlookers. All of them nobles, he noticed, were like background noise compared to the beating of his heart against his ears. One small mistake could spell disaster and embarrassment for Clara's reputation and standing as a princess. He didn't care about his image, his dignity, or anything stupid like that, but he would not be the reason his princess's standing could be tarnished. He stopped in front of Cynthia at the same, and, much like the banner holders of the prince, who had retreated after the prince sat on his throne, the four of them turned in unison and hit the ground 3 times, waiting for Clara to come closer since she only had 4 banner holders instead of the 20 of her brother. When she neared, the 4 of them inclined their poles forward, their banners flowing right above the princess's head as she walked underneath them. Just like with the prince before her, flower petals and feathers rained from above when she walked up the stairs, making her way to the last remaining throne. When she sat down, a smaller banner identical to the prince's unfurled, and the onlookers went wild, clapping their hands and shouting the mottos of their houses, with that of House Astor, "Loyalty is its own reward," being the loudest of them all. Now came the most difficult step, he reminded himself. He hit the ground once and took a step back. Another strike, another step back. It had to be done in synchronization with the other banner holders, and so far no mistake had been performed. 2 more strikes, 2 more steps, and it was done. Cynthia's rigorous training had paid off. "You were stiff at the start. We had to compensate for the last moments of the march since your pace was off, and you inclined your banner 2 degrees extra." The voice of Cynthia rang inside his mind while the blue-haired woman remained still and as unbending as titanium. "All in all, you performed much better than I had feared, Wyatt. Congratulations. Now that this is over, once we return to the Noir Navio, we can continue with your physical and melee training." Oh, how joyous, Wyatt thought with dismay.